Today on The Real Story, we're getting ready for primary 2023. Key seats across the state waiting to be filled. What you need to know as a voter. Connecticut's Secretary of the State is joining us to talk election security, absentee voting, and why voting local really counts. Plus, we're getting insight into Connecticut's poll worker problem and possible new voting tech that's just waiting for funding. And a unique campaign to get people out to the polls. Zella, a Connecticut drag queen, is here to talk about LGBTQ+ rights on the ballot. As an ambassador for Drag Out the Vote, we'll learn what she and others nationwide are hearing as they work to get people involved. Good morning, and thanks for joining us on The Real Story. I'm Emma Wolforst. In a little over a week, voters will head to the polls for primary 2023, so we're getting an inside look at all things election from the Secretary of the State, Stephanie Thomas. Thank you, as always, for joining us.
Thank you, as always, for having me.
So, election 2023, it's quickly approaching. It's almost here, just about a week, and we know a lot of attention, though, is already being pulled to 2024, a big presidential race coming up. I don't know if you've heard about that.
Just a little.
But, let's talk about local elections here. How many people in Connecticut are, skipping out on elections sometimes? And for your office, is there a way to change that and engage voters more?
Too many people are skipping out. Compared to presidential election years where we usually see something like 80% turnout, for local elections, that number drops to under 35%. Wow. So many people are giving up their voice for the issues that I hear people talking about, the kitchen table issues, when you talk about property taxes, local parks and schools and whatnot. These are things that people should be weighing in locally about.
Obviously, as you said, a lot of issues that are happening at the local level, and your office has been making a major push, even with your own hashtag of Vote Local, but a lot of people might not be so local on election day. So let's talk absentee ballots. Those are available right now, correct?
That is correct. So people have gotten confused because of a new law passed in 2021. But right now, you still need an excuse in Connecticut to vote by absentee ballot. And those excuses are outlined in statute in our state constitution. Next year, voters get to decide if we can vote by absentee without an excuse. But right now, you have to fit one of those criteria. And if I may, the one that people get really confused about is illness. Okay. So an example I give, say there's a couple, and this is a real situation I came across. Husband's having knee surgery the day before the election. The wife told me I might not be able to leave him alone on election day to go vote. Now they both can vote by absentee ballot, whereas prior to the law fix, only he would have been able to.
Gotcha. And you mentioned, obviously, voters getting the chance to decide if they want to have that option. I know, it's something that's been a big conversation at the state legislature. No excuse, absentee ballot voting. We saw that during the pandemic.
Correct.
More absentee ballot voting. A lot of people saying that contributed to higher voter turnout.
Absolutely.
Back then. Do you think no excuse absentee ballot voting is the right move for Connecticut?
I do think so. When I was in the legislature, I certainly supported that bill. And I've heard from so many people, including all of those who testified these many years, that it's been discussed. And there are just so many situations. What I like to say is that absentee ballots provide flexibility when life does not.
Right.
So, you might get a flat tire, all these unexpected things can happen in life. So it's better to have a longer period of time where people can exercise their right to vote.
Sure. And speaking of a longer period of time for people to exercise their right to vote, early voting. It's passed. Connecticut is getting early voting. But when does that actually kick in? At what election will people here in Connecticut actually be able to start voting early?
Correct. Early voting does not kick in until 2024. The first election will be the presidential preference primary, a long name that no one knows, for the April election.
Right. So not our
Not this
election
fall.
coming. Gotcha.
Yep.
So people have to wait a little bit longer
Exactly.
for that. So you've been sounding the alarm of needing new voting tech really since you were sworn in here in Connecticut. We're hearing there could be an overhaul of these aging tabulators in time for maybe the next election, but your office is still fighting to get that money approved, correct?
Yeah, I think many people have sounded the alarm over the years. Even when I got to the legislature before becoming secretary, people were talking about the aging tabulators.
Sure.
Secretary Merrill certainly talked about it. The best example I can always give people when they talk about it's a big price tag. But most people don't realize there hasn't been a major investment in election infrastructure in this country for about 20 years, neither by the federal government and not by the state government either. So I tell people for a long time I drove old car that had 254,000 miles on
Wow.
it. And it definitely got me from point A to point B, but passengers had to get in on the driver's side and scoot over, and it had no air conditioning or radio that worked. So our tabulators still drive, but is this how we want to run our elections? We get the elections we pay for.
Gotcha. So that bond package that you want to approve that would include that funding for the tabulators would also have some money to go toward more poll workers. How much of an issue is staffing right now, and what do you think needs to be done?
Sure, and the bonding covers the infrastructure, and poll workers would come through a legislative appropriation.
Gotcha.
But we definitely need thousands more poll workers than we currently have had to have with 1 day of elections. Early voting will be a 14-day period in its longest election for the general elections, and we just need bodies. So our office is happy to help recruit. We are tasked and have been funded to put together a training program, but that's only half the equation.
Well, I know that was a big conversation when early voting was kind of being materialized in the legislature this past session, was how much money, there was a lot of debate back and forth of how much funding should be put in place to successfully implement early voting. So it seems like we still maybe don't have quite enough money.
We definitely don't have enough money because we don't have any for the next fiscal year. So the next fiscal year is when we'll have the presidential election and the statewide primary in August 2024. So those tend to be the largest turnout elections. So it will take time, resources, and people. And I think the state will provide some funding, and I just continue to push to make sure that it's enough.
Sure. So between aging voting tech and lots of mail-in ballots, disinformation online, of course, right now we're seeing a former president in court for trying to overturn an election. A lot of people are really questioning the reliability of elections. They have been for a couple years, but especially right now. What do you want them to know about Connecticut's election process and security?
Our integrity, our security, our process, they're all good. Any system can always be tweaked for the better. That's probably true, but I have the honor, really, of dealing and working with the registrars and the town clerks. We have monthly meetings since I took office, and I've been continually impressed about the level of diligence and the ability of this workforce to both help each other, but also come to our office if they need additional guidance. They're not just out there saying, oh, this sounds like a good idea, let me do this.
Right.
So I'd like to reassure Connecticut voters that we have a great system, and we never moved away from paper, which some states did.
Right.
So a lot of the stories we hear on the national news never would have applied to us because we always have a paper record.
Gotcha. So in the next few weeks, you're working with people across the state for National Voter Registration Day. You're reminding people to make their voting plans. So, our last question here, what's your final pitch for people to get out to the polls, whether it be in person or absentee?
Final pitch, if in doubt about anything about elections this year, go to myvote.ct.gov and definitely check to see if your town is having a primary. And please, please, please vote in the November 7th general election. We tell people all the time, shop local, buy local, eat local. You need to vote local because it is the most important thing.
Definitely an important message. As always, thank you so much for joining us. Of course, well, there's still lots more to come here on The Real Story. We're talking about dragging out the vote, not just because local voters might have to be dragged to their polls, but because a drag queen is getting in on the mission. Zella will join us to talk about getting creative to get Connecticut people to pay attention to their communities and show up this election. But first, we're helping you make your voting plan and breaking down absentee ballots. The 2023 primary is fast approaching on September 12th. So let's talk about all you need to know as a voter. For those who just can't get to the polls in person, an absentee ballot is the way to go. But how do you get one? Well, you have to apply either online, through the mail, or in person. And when you do request a ballot, you need one of these reasons: active service in the U.S. Armed Forces, if you'll be out of town, sickness, physical disability, if your religion forbids non-religious activity that day, or if you're working as an election official at a polling place other than your own. And if you lie, there are consequences. It is a Class D felony to misrepresent your eligibility. Now, if you do get an absentee ballot, you have until primary day to turn it in. If you're mailing it in, though, there's an earlier deadline. But whether you stamp it or drop it off in one of the many ballot boxes, absentee voting usually takes the brunt of the blame for voter fraud. What we do know is absentee ballots get many more people to vote. And we talked to a town clerk responsible for handing out and processing absentee ballots. She says beyond being convenient, you can be sure the process is secure.
Our ballots are secure. They come back to us, they're voted on, they're in an envelope, confidential envelope. We track who's voting, who received a ballot, who returned their ballot, and then we keep it locked in the safe until Election Day when we give it to the registrars.
There are several anti-fraud protections built into the absentee voting process. You have to be an already registered voter. You must sign on the external envelope. And Carla says a lot of people forget this step. If you do, your vote won't be counted. So don't forget to sign. Election authorities have to double check every ballot to see that everything matches the voter's registration. So if you're going to apply for an absentee ballot, pull out your calendar. These are the days to remember. September 7th is the last chance to apply on the online portal or by mailing in an application. Your absolute last chance to apply in person is September 11th by noon. And of course, primary day is September 12th. Polls are open from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m., but if you're voting absentee, you don't have to be there in person. Election 2023 has key races across the state, and we are not done talking about it all. We'll keep breaking down the ballots, questioning the candidates, and getting everything you need to know to be an informed and confident voter. Be sure to download the Fox 61 News app or bookmark our website for our continuous coverage.